So many of you know what myth is. Many of you know what mythology is. Many fellow Christians feel that myth is all just a big lie. And anytime you associate the Bible with myth, you're doing it a disservice. You're insulting Christianity and the Bible. This is actually not true. Any academics who understand this will tell people that this is not an insult whatsoever. In fact, myth is the most foundational type of storytelling that exists. It has nothing to do with whether it's true or not, right? Myth is culturally foundational. So, myth is about the heroes, the legends, the history that form the very foundational part of your culture and the stories behind your culture. So when someone says the Bible is mythical, say thank you. Thank you very much. Because that means the Bible is very influential, powerful, and it's the undergirding stories under our civilization or under a civilization. So Greek mythology, there you go. Say thank you, right? If you are part of the Greco-Roman tradition, that is a compliment. Please thank you and I'll have some more. So we must understand then that people like Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, and C.S. Lewis did not flout on this issue. They were not uneducated or uninformed or doctrinally unsound on this matter. And what they said was that the Bible is basically the only kind of myth that is based in truth. In other words, myth is a larger category of story. And it's not simply by its own nature true or false. But as far as they can tell, the Bible is the only mythical structure that's based in truth. So, obviously there's other stories, right, within myth that have truth to them, that are based in truth in places. But the very foundational ideas behind the Bible are likewise the truths that undergird Western civilization and Judeo-Christianity. So here we have this concept of mythopoeia. Now, mythopoeia is different from just myth or mythology, right? Mythopoeia is a love of myth to such a degree that you are purposefully creating myth and inculcating that myth that you've purposefully created in modern times. You've inculcated that myth with values. So that's what mythopoeia is about. And so you get stories like Lord of the Rings, right? That's intentionally created myth by J.R.R. Tolkien. He calls it mythopoeia. And he even wrote a poem about mythopoeia, in which he ascribes humanity as a sub-creator of God. So God creates us in his image. One of the things about us being created in the image of God is that we make art, we make things, right? We make machines, we make art, we make all kinds of things, our creations, right, that we make. And so that makes us a sub-creator. Now, whether we will make and create following God's example is another question. We have that choice, right? We have that free will, the right to follow in God's footsteps, or to make something that's wholly unworthy of God's, putting God's name associated with it. But if you are following, right? If you are following in the path that he has for us, now the myth that you create is going to have God's values inculcated in it. And that's literally what Tolkien and Lewis intended to do and did do. So, and then they talked about Mythopoeia. And here's my belief. My belief, based upon what Tolkien and Lewis did, is that they intended for the people who came after them to carry on their torch, to carry their baton and continue in the film world and other places, right? To carry on the torch of making Mythopoeia. So people like George Lucas has done this, right? Whether his story is Christian or founded in God's truth is another question. But Star Wars is a Mythopoeia. That's literally what Mythopoeia is. There's many other sci-fi stories. There's many other fantasy stories that contain in it values and things like this. But Mythopoeia is a love of myth, but also a creation of myth following in the pattern of God. And it's intentional in the modern day. But what it does is it inculcates your values in that myth that you create. So generally, a myth is formed in history, kind of like the classics, right? We call them the classics. But these classic works are classic works in many ways because, true, they're from the classical era, but they've lasted, right? This is why we call classic music or classic rock. It's not classical, right? But it's classic in the sense that it's enduring, right? So, while it's true that some myth is enduring storytelling, and therefore it speaks of that era that it comes from, it wasn't necessarily created intentionally as myth, but it became myth because of its enduring qualities. But Mythopoeia is intentionally created myth. So, as I stated, Star Wars and these kinds of stories are like this as well. You know, Dune, Star Wars, other stories that inculcate values. I do notice that typically in the modern era, our stories are inculcating bad values, like Dune, right? They're not positive qualities in people that you want to emulate. They don't demonstrate excellence, unless you consider Machiavellian nature to be excellence, which, God forbid, I hope not. So it's things like Star Wars, I think, in the modern day, that's more accurately inculcating values. So I thought I would read Tolkien's Mythopoeia poem. And the great thing about this poem is there's, in the beginning, there's kind of an introduction which dedicates the poem to a certain person, and we now know who this is. Basically, he's dedicated this to C.S. Lewis, because as it says here, I'll read it, it says, "To one who said that myths were lies and therefore worthless, even though breathed through silver." So that's famously what occurred between Tolkien and Lewis, is that Lewis, as a new believer, was not quite sure about this idea of myth. Tolkien hadn't sufficiently educated him on this matter yet. And even Lewis, to some degree, was a believer that myths were bad and lies. So you can see then that Tolkien was correct. I will read now Mythopoeia by J.R.R. Tolkien. You look at trees and label them just so, for trees are trees and growing is to grow. You walk the earth and tread with solemn pace, one of the many minor globes of space. A star's a star, some matter in a ball, compelled to courses mathematical, amid the regimented cold inane, where destined atoms are each moment slain. At bidding of a will to which we bend and must but only dimly apprehend, great processes march on as time unrolls from dark beginnings to uncertain goals. And as on page or written without clue, with script and limning pact of various hue, an endless multitude of forms appear, some grim, some frail, some beautiful, some queer. Each alien except as kin from one, remote origo nat man stone and sun. God made the petrous rocks, the arboreal trees, Tellurian earth and stellar stars, and these homuncular men who walk upon the ground, with nerves that tingle, touched by light and sound, the movements of the sea, the wind and boughs, green grass, the large slow oddity of cows, thunder and lightning, birds that wheel and cry, slime crawling up from mud to live and die. These each are duly registered in print, the brain's contortions with a separate dint. Yet trees are not trees until so named and seen, and never were to named till those had been, whose speech involuted breath unfurled, faint echo and dim picture of the world. But neither record nor photograph, being divination, judgment, and a laugh, response of chose that felt a stir within, my deep monition movements that were kin to life and death of trees, of beasts, of stars, free captives undermining shadowy bars, digging the foreknown from experience, and painting the vein of spirit out of sense. Great powers they slowly brought out of themselves, and looking backward they beheld the elves, that wrought on cunning forges in the mind, and light and dark on secret looms entwined. He sees no stars who does not see them first, of living silver made that sudden burst, to flame like flowers beneath an ancient song, whose very echo after music long has since pursued. There is no firmament, only a void unless a jeweled tent, myth woven and elf patterned, and no earth, unless the mother's womb whence all have birth. The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise, and still recalls him, though now long estranged. Man is not wholly lost nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rages of lordship one he owned. His world dominion by creative act, not his to worship the great artifact. Man sub-creator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined, in living shapes that move from mind to mind. Though all the crannies of the world were we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods in their houses out of dark and light, and sow the seed of dragons, 'twas our right. Used or misused, the right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we're made. Yes, wish-fulfilled dreams we spin to cheat our timid hearts an ugly fact defeat. Whence came the wish, and whence the power to dream? Or some things fair and others ugly deem? All wishes are not idle nor in vain. Fulfillment we devise, for pain is pain. Not for itself to be desired, but ill, or else to strive, or to subdue the will. Alike we're graceless, and of evil thus alone is dreadly certain evil is. Blessed are the timid hearts that evil hate, that quail in its shadow and yet shut the gate, that seek no parley in a guarded room, though small and bare upon a clumsy loom, weave tissues gilded by the far-off day, hoped and believed in under shadow's sway. Blessed are the men of Noah's race that build their little arks, though frail and poorly filled, and steer through winds contrary towards a wrath, a rumor of a harbor guessed by faith. Blessed are the legend makers with their rhyme of things not found within recorded time. It is not they that have forgot the night, or bid us flee to originalized delight, in lotus isles of economic bliss, forswearing souls to gain a circe kiss, and counterfeit at that, machine-produced, bogus seduction of the twice seduced. Such isles they saw afar, and ones more fair, and those that hear them yet may yet beware. They have seen death and ultimate defeat, and yet they would not in despair retreat, but off to victory have turned the lyre, and kindled hearts with legendary fire, illuminating now, and dark hath been, with light of suns, as yet by no man seen. I would that I might with the minstrel sing, and stir the unseen with a throbbling string. I would be with the mariners of the deep, that cut their slender planks of mountain steep, and voyage upon a vague and wandering quest, for some have passed beyond the fabled west. I would with beleaguered fools be bold, that keep an inner fastness where their gold. Impure and scanty, yet they loyally bring to mint an image blurred of distant king, or in fantastic banners weave the sheen, heraldic emblems of a lord unseen. I will not walk with your progressive apes, erect and sapient, before them gapes the dark abyss to which their progress tends, if by God's mercy progress ever ends, and does not ceaselessly revolve the same unfruitful course with changing of a name. I will not treat your dusty path and flat, denoting this, and that by this and chat. Your world immutable, wherein no part the little maker has with maker's art. I bow not yet before the iron crown, nor cast my own small golden scepter down. In paradise perchance the eye may stray from gazing upon everlasting day, to see the day illumined and renew from mere truth the likeness of the true. Then looking on the blessed land 'twill see that all is as it is, and yet made free. Salvation changes not, nor yet destroys gardener, children, nor their toys. Evil it will not see, for evil lies not in God's picture, but in crooked eyes. Not in the source, but in malicious choice, and not in sound, but in the tuneless voice. In paradise they look no more awry, and though they make anew, they make no lie. Be sure they still will make, not being dead, and poets shall have flames upon their head, and harps whereon their faultless fingers fall. There each shall choose for ever from the all. So, that is J.R.R. Tolkien's Mythopoeia, and it's just a beautiful love of storytelling, and how he describes where it comes from, where it's going, the value that it has, how we should not throw our scepters down of beauty. These aren't just scepters of tyrannical rule, right? These are scepters of beauty. You're a holder of beauty when you tell stories. So the idea here is that many Christians have the wrong idea that we should not be creating, that we should just look at nature and say, glory be to God, and then that's it. But no, God also made you, and God also made you not to just be beautiful and sit there, but to create. That's part of why God made man. That's part of how he made us. So we are sent on a journey as Christians then, and as human beings, because God made us all, as human beings to create, to bring beauty into the world that's never been before. So this is not a dishonor to call wonderful stories myths. And it does not mean that they're lies whatsoever, but instead that they reflect the greater light. So we are the moon reflecting the sun. In this dark world, right, before God returns here, we have our time to be the moon and reflect the sun on the other side of the planet. So that's what we're here to do. And when we're not doing that, when we're just sharing our own light, right, which doesn't contain truth in it, then that light is greatly dimmed. So we do want to mirror his light. In doing that, we also create like he does. So this is not a bad quality. This is not a bad thing. So our job then, as people who want to basically rebuild Western civilization, which I think that was part of Lewis and Tolkien's job as well, because they were here only, 60 years ago, 50, 60 years ago? Being very productive, during, before, during, and right after World War II, being very productive. And, but they were being productive and doing something specific. They weren't just writing, right? They weren't just having fun and creating entertainment. They were making things that inculcated values in them, and they were doing it in a mythological way, right? In a timeless fashion. So we need to be doing this more. We need to be reading about these guys, these kinds of people, and doing the kinds of stuff that they make. So how does one do this, right? Well, you study the people who do it, right? This has always been true for art. You go to art school, and what do? You study other artists. This is not rocket science. And this is why, as a filmmaker, when I was, give me 1 second here. When I was heading up Film Bar Mondays, which does still exist, folks, I would talk about watching films and discussing films. There's a lot of local filmmakers I knew and still do know who make films, but not all of them study and review other people's films or Hollywood films, right? They just kind of are engaged in making their own original work. And I respect that. That's good. There's nothing wrong with being productive and making your work. But I think when you fail to compare your work, and when you fail to understand and learn from film criticism, you really do yourself a disservice as a filmmaker. Because just like if you go to art school or you go to film school, they're going to teach you about other filmmakers first. They're not going to just ask you what you want to make. They're going to talk about other films, great films, some of the best films ever made. Hopefully, that's going to be the focus, because whenever you're learning some craft, you're learning how to do it properly, right? You're not learning about all these bad filmmakers and then saying, good luck, hope you don't make those kind of films. That's not how you teach any form of craft or art or anything, any discipline, right? You don't just show someone how to exercise badly and then say, good luck. No, you show them the correct way to do it, right? You model the best way. And then you study that, right, as a student. And then you try to emulate it, really. Now, if you're emulating it too closely, obviously, or if you're copying it, I'm not saying that's bad and you shouldn't do it. That's an effort to understand. That's an effort to emulate, right? As a compliment to that other person. because you're learning how to do something well. If you've already seen someone do something well, you have to learn from them. So, it pays a culture a great compliment to appropriate that culture, and I believe that. So, you love a people, you love a culture, and you love a piece of art because that's what culture comes from, is their art. So if you love an art, then you're loving that culture. And if you're learning from that art and emulating that art, you're also appropriating that art and culture. This is just 101 how culture and art works. So there's nothing wrong with this. Now, this is not necessarily your own art, right? When you emulate it, what you have to do is learn enough about the great artists that you've incorporated and absorbed many of these skills, these crafts, into your tool belt. So you learn how to, let's say you're a painter, right? You learn how to do brush strokes the way some of your favorite painters do them. Maybe it's pointillism. Maybe it's some other method or technique that they use that you love and you want to emulate that. So you end up breaking down their art into many different elements. And you can break them down eventually into the things you prefer and the things you don't prefer as much. And then you take from that art, those techniques from them, and you practice them, right? And you can do that with multiple artists, multiple masters of the art. So now you are practicing those elements of these different artists, and you've broken it down into these basic elements of how to create. So what comes after that then is a product that's more your own. It's not their product anymore. It's not who they are, right? You've incorporated their techniques into your own style. So this is also true with writing or with any kind of art. It's true with writing, with music, with film, with any kind of art at all. You'll always see this wherever you go. And you'll even see artists referencing the people that are their masters and the people that they are most inspired by all the time. They do this all the time. So this is not some strange concept. This is just always how it's done. So this respect that you hold for an artist, if you're also an artist, you are going to be incorporating many of their techniques and their ideas and their methods, and you're going to be incorporating them into your own art. So if you want to make Mythopoeia, you learn from the best Mythopoeia out there, right? Like Tolkien, like Lewis and Chronicles of Narnia, like George Lucas and Star Wars, if that's your bag. So these are the people you learn from. So don't be surprised by this. This is something that you must do if you want to make good art. So in our case, why are we talking about Mythopoeia? Well, we're talking about it because it's about culture and about preserving, right? I'm a conservative, right? So we preserve values from the past. We see the meaning and the values in them, right? So we've broken down this art. We've broken down these stories, these myths, these legends, right? We've broken them down into meaningful values, right? And we've understood the value in those things. That's kind of what values is, right? We value them. So it's not just the thing itself, it's the response to the thing. So these things have values, and then they are values because we value them. So if we no longer value them, they kind of stop becoming values, don't they? So that's kind of how that works. we have to continue to value them, or we will lose those as values, right? As our values. And so Mythopoeia is an intentional effort to do this. And so I intend to do this. I've been working on this for some time. I have many stories that accomplish this goal. And I closed out my old film company this last year, which was called Liberty Number 5 Pictures. And my new film company is going to be called Trythia Films. So Trythia is a land in which its myths are based in truth. So that's why it's called Trythia. And so the attempt is to kind of bridge the gap for many people who don't understand the power of myth, the meaning of myth, how myth can be based in truth. So we just tell you straight out. This is a place, Trythia is a place in which our myths are based in truth. So that's what Trythia is about. We have, our intention is to start small with small projects, right? And those small projects, such as shorts, or such as what's called a torch at Angel Studios, are basically proof of concepts. So a proof of concept is basically a small example of a larger thing. And that thing is blown up into the feature film later, but it starts out as a proof of concept, which is a small version, which is the same basic elements that are in that feature, but they're made smaller, right? So the concept gets shown very clearly to the viewer or investor what this feature is going to look like, what it's about, what's the tone. All of that's contained in the proof of concept, which, as I stated at Angel, is called a torch. So we are going to be working on torches, and our torches are going to be 5 to 30 minutes. They're shorts, basically. And the idea is that we seek to develop these torches into either features or series. So some of them, I'm not saying that every project we originate will start with a torch, but many of them are, and that's our intention, is for most of them to be started as a torch. Why? Because we want to gauge the support we're going to get for each of these projects. If one of our torches get more funding or more help or more support, now we're in the right direction, right? And we're going in the right direction, and we're going to be putting our support behind this, and we're going to be turning it into a feature or a series. So that's kind of how that works. But this isn't just about where I come from, right, with film. This is also about every kind of art. This is about music. This is about, books, literature, comics. This is about all kinds of art forms. And also, I'm going to be, just like how I'm here talking about these concepts, I'm also writing a book about much of this. It's called The Moses We Need, and it's about the founding of Media Moses. So Media Moses is a separate entity from Trythia Film, and they're not completely associated, but they're both run by me. So, but Media Moses is a film and entertainment news site. So we talk about faith-based film, American film, conservative film, that's a movement that I call con wave. Personally, I call that con wave. But it's basically American film that's not woke film. That's essentially all that is. So films like Top Gun, Maverick, that's just an American film. It's not woke whatsoever. So those kinds of films, we talk about that. So we're not against Hollywood 100%, but we do think that Hollywood is on the downswing. We don't intend to support Hollywood as a culture or as a industry. We intend to support the movements outside of Hollywood that seek to carry on the torch of Americanism and freedom and these ideas. So included in that is our heritage as Christians, because that's where you get that ethic from. So the Judeo-Christian ethic comes from there. And that idea that freedom is what saves us is a biblical concept. So you can't kind of divorce the Americanism from Christianity, and you can't divorce the Christianity from Americanism. They need each other, essentially. So we've talked about myth, Mythopoeia, Trythia. We've talked about Tolkien's poem Mythopoeia. And we've talked about how Mythopoeia is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. But, there are examples to me of Mythopoeia in the modern time, but there's not a lot, frankly. We need more of it. And one exciting thing happening now is that the Daily Wire is putting out, is creating right now the Pendragon cycle, which I consider to be Mythopoeia. So this is a Stephen R. Lawhead novel, or series of novels called the Pendragon cycle. And it should be coming out this summer or this fall, is my guess, the Pendragon cycle. But they've been filming since last fall in 2023 in Europe, and we do stories on the Pendragon cycle at Media Moses. We just did one today, actually, which is why it's fresh in my mind, and why I wanted to talk about Mythopoeia. So check out MediaMoses.com, our article on Pendragon cycle. And we don't talk a lot about Mythopoeia in that article, but we have spoken about it in length in places on our website. There's a few other places where they talk about Mythopoeia, places like Lorehaven, any Tolkien site will talk about Mythopoeia. Obviously, places like any C.S. Lewis place will talk about Mythopoeia as well. But the other place I thought I would share with you about Mythopoeia is on Wikipedia. So, and there's another author who I consider to be almost even better than Tolkien and Lewis on this matter, even though he doesn't talk about Mythopoeia. He does fairy tales, and he influenced both Tolkien and Lewis, and his name is George MacDonald. I've talked about George MacDonald numerous times, but Georgie is a fairy tale author, and he inspired many people, including just about any fairy tale you can imagine. Something like Lewis Carroll and his Alice in Wonderland. Like, he got his stuff from George MacDonald. So, or was inspired deeply by George MacDonald. So, another factor about this is the legendarium. And the legendarium is Tolkien's mythopoeic writing. So it's basically a compilation of his stuff in his universe. And that's often what Mythopoeia can do, is create something like a legendarium or a Bible of a universe. And so this is kind of what films, what their franchises do, is they make these kinds of they make these efforts to expand their universe, kind of like the expanded universe of Star Wars and these other franchises. Looks like we have Rebecca. Hello, Rebecca. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Yeah, sorry about before.
That's okay. I'm sorry about before.
Yeah, you probably didn't know that I could hear it so loudly.
Yes, this wall that we have here seems thicker than it really is.
Yeah, yeah. But I've been talking about Mythopoeia, obviously.
Yeah. Were you just talking about George MacDonald?
I was.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure if there was a delay or what, but well, then I guess I hopped in at the right time.
Yeah. You want to talk about George MacDonald?
Well, I'll just like my own experience with him. We had a
Mm-hmm.
friend with a book of short stories or fairy tales, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on such a kick of reading at that time in my life. I was just reading everything I could find. And she lent it to us, and it was just all these really strange but beautiful fairy tales that were just totally different from your usual Princess and the Pea and Little Red Riding Hood. They were much deeper, much more like, I almost want to say soulful.
Yeah.
And they just got your mind just dreaming and wandering, and they were so creative. And I especially remember Day Boy and Night Girl. I thought that was just the strangest, coolest fairy tale. And but all of them were so good. The Light Princess was just
beautiful.
This girl who has no gravity, and so she's just always
floating around,
and all the problems that creates.
Yeah.
And, all the beautiful scenarios, but also problems, but also, her reality is so different from everyone else's. And
yeah, and that one's really interesting, because some would consider that maybe a very, very limiting story. There's only so much you can do. I would differ with that. I think that, well, first of all, it's, as anybody might be able to tell, it's like a metaphor, right? The Light Princess is a metaphor for taking things too lightly. And when you're someone who takes things too lightly, you can't be serious at all. If you're a princess, you're supposed to take the kingdom seriously. And so, like as a Christian, this has a lot of meaning, because as a Christian, you're supposed to take the kingdom seriously. But if you're someone who's just, entertaining yourself with food and nonsense, right, video games or whatever, something unproductive. Not that all video games are bad, but it's like, but like, if you're taking the kingdom too lightly, then you're kind of a useless person. And this is kind of what the Light Princess is speaking about. It's saying that she's kind of a useless person in the kingdom in many ways. But the idea is to give her back her gravity, right? It's not to just be like, well, I can still be useful here. I can still be, I can maybe do something interesting with it. I'm like a superhero. I can do something. I don't have to be like everybody else. No. George MacDonald never at any point is like, she'll be fine. She can go. She can be useful in this state somehow. She's still a useful person. I'm just going to pretend she's still normal and useful. No, he doesn't do that whatsoever. It's about restoring her gravity, right? So, in other words, she's been harmed in some way. And so, which of course happens at the beginning of the story from a witch who curses her. And we know this because if you read the story, you know this. So, you know, you don't try to look at it with a different perspective and say, oh, this is, I'll make do with my situation. No, it's about restoring her gravity. So, so how does that happen? And so this is that story. But what it does is it creates a very cinematic experience, right? And cinema didn't exist in his time. Yeah. But what it did is when you read the stories, you're imagining this princess, this beautiful princess, but she's got this ribbon tied around her waist, and she's kind of floating about in this precarious fashion. And you're just like watching this lady floating about. It's such a strange image, right? And this really kind of creates a sort of wonder in your mind. And similarly to how you mentioned the Day Boy and Night Girl, who are two people who were also harmed by a witch, who wanted to study them, and she puts them in this sort of prison, and one of them she only allows out during the day, and the other she only allows out at night, and she's experimenting on them to see how they're going to, how are they going to change? How are they going to change as people as a result of this? And they end up finding each other, right? And they become useful to each other because one is only useful in the day, the other is only useful at night. At the other time of the day, they're like helpless morons, basically, and they don't know what to do. Well, what do? They help each other, right? So this is a metaphor for marriage. And obviously, there's a boy and a girl. They're kind of made for each other, right? So it's like the story, right, of Joseph, right? Your brothers meant this for evil, but God meant this for good. Yeah. And so, this terrible witch meant this for evil with these two poor souls, but God meant this for good. Yeah. So he used this to bring these two lost souls together and help each other. Yeah. And so it's bringing beauty out of this bad situation. So there's many other stories like this that George MacDonald makes, and they're all just so marvelous and fascinating. And they're all cinematic. There's all some kind of beauty that he attaches to these stories. I mean, if you've ever liked the Grimm's fairy tales, these are nothing compared to George MacDonald. Nothing at all. And you know why people don't know them? Because they're Christian. Like they're just beautiful Christian stories. Christians don't even know who George. Like I don't want to insult so many Christians, but guys, get it together. Like you have some of the best stories ever written, and you don't even tell anybody about them. Like why are you doing that? That's so, like, it's so insulting. Like there's these people who gave their lives for these stories, and you don't even talk about them. Like, come on. So, people like me and my wife and many other people we've known, well, not many, but just a few, right, have said the same thing. Like, why does nobody talk about these things? Well, we have to be, it's true, I shouldn't be so frustrated and angry at people for not talking about it, because same lesson, right? The devil means this for bad, but God meant it for good. So maybe it just wasn't the right time yet, right? So his stories are going to come back into the limelight. People, there's lots of beautiful stories that Christianity has forgotten. And it's no wonder our culture has been darkened.
Yeah.
So all you have to do, like, find these stories. I can tell you what they are, what many of these stories are, you know? Paradise Lost, Dante's Inferno, these George MacDonald stories. There's a good 30 George MacDonald stories. Incredible. You know? Obviously Tolkien and Lewis, but they're more modern. But there's other romantics. There's other, which is from the 1800s. There's many other incredible writers, and many of them have made mythical stories like these. So,
Hind's Feet on High Places.
Yeah, Hind's Feet in High Places. I haven't read that one, but I know you rave about it.
Yeah, I really liked it when I was in my 20s, and then I read it again with my daughter and re-liked it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one I wouldn't mind delving into more. Was that done in? Is that public domain?
I don't know. Good question.
Yeah. I guess if it's before like the 1920s, it probably is.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That might be more like C.S. Lewis's era than Tolkien's era.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And she wrote a lot of other things too, although I'm not sure if she wrote fiction.
Yeah.
Or devotionals.
Yeah, there are quite a few more modern Christian writers who are like not necessarily overtly Christian, but they have very good symbolic kinds of stories. In the more modern era, like the people, like with writers who are still living, like Stephen R. Lawhead and Ted Dekker and other modern writers, these are modern Christian writers who, some of them are making Mythopoeia. Obviously some are going to be better than others, but, when you're adapting something, I mean, I know that people say this. People say, oh, you can't make something better than the book. That's actually not true. Like, if you're a good filmmaker, you can actually make something better than the book. So, that's not meant as an insult to the writer, but there's some stuff that's written that's not very cinematic, for example. Or some people would say, oh, this is not meant for the screen or whatever. Maybe there's too much dialogue or what have you. But you'd be surprised what a good filmmaker can do to kind of like adapt and modify a story for the screen. Like Blade Runner. I mean, that was adapted from a story that almost sounds like it wasn't even the same story. Yeah. I mean, he extrapolated a lot from that. But
it was great though.
Yeah, just the basic concept was there, but he really added a whole story and characters and things that, just really added things that made it a powerful story. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's two different experiences. Like reading a story, reading a book is an entirely different experience from watching a movie. So
Yeah.
I don't think you could really say one is better than the other. They're just different experiences,
Yeah. Like for me, it's I separate them in my head too as very different experiences. I don't expect the same thing from books as I do from movies at all. At all. I personally like books that are very readable. Like, in other words, you can read them quickly. They kind of move you forward in a forward motion. They don't get lost too much in description. I like those because I just think that they're more enjoyable. And I find too that a lot of description is unnecessary. I think that you kind of want, as a reader, at least for me, because I'm very imaginative, I want to be able to like imagine it myself. And the more you describe it, the more it's like it doesn't feel like real life. Like when you enter a room, you don't spend the next 10 minutes analyzing everything on the desk. Like you just don't do that. you come in the room and you feel the vibe of the room. Like you get a general impression of the room. And certain things stick with you, and a lot of other things you just don't care about. And often writers, they just don't do that. Like they like love their world so much that they're like enamored with every detail. And I think that's kind of fun in some ways. But understand then that when that film gets adapted, if it ever gets adapted into a film, the filmmaker's not supposed to do that. They're just not. If they do that, it's going to be a super boring film. I mean, really boring. So the filmmakers have to be smart enough to be like, this is not what people do when they watch films. Films are more like an experience, right? Like an actual experience. So you want to get the read of the room and move on with your plot, you know.
Yeah.
And similarly to like, you know, meanings behind stories, your meanings are going to be communicated very differently with film. They're going to be communicated more visually, right? Not like deep inner character work. A lot of that stuff cannot be shown in a film.
Yeah.
So, and if you do, you have to be an extremely good filmmaker, because you have to understand that you have to use cinematic language to communicate those stories that, or those deep meanings that a writer would say completely differently in their book. So you have to kind of extrapolate that and say, well, this is how I'm going to say it in my film, which is different, frankly, from the book. But if those deep inner messages in the story are that important, you have to let a lot of that go as a filmmaker, and just kind of like, nope, I need these meanings in here for the viewer to get, because if they don't get them, then they're not getting the whole story. So that becomes very important. But you know,
and it's really like editing. You've got to really edit so much out and just hone in on the real heart of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people, they don't understand. Like there's like a hierarchy of meaning in stories. Like there's more important parts of a story, and then there's less important things. And many of those have to go when you're like adapting a work. Like you have to let a lot of that extra stuff go. But if you can get it in there, that's good. You just don't want to distract from the main thrust of your story. So, I mean, that's kind of how I look at the differences. I mean, and so as a result, a lot of stories kind of resonate with me more, because a lot of books, you know, because they are moving forward with that forward thrusting motion, with like plot, you know, and often, you know, character development is very fun. It's very relatable. So, you know, that's a lot of the stuff people like. And it's not like I don't like description. I just don't want it to be, I don't want it to overwhelm your tone and your pacing, and to interrupt all that. Just seems contradictory to me in a way.
Yeah.
So that's actually why I liked reading the Hunger Games books.
Oh yeah.
Even though I'm not like a super fan of Hunger Games or anything, I enjoyed reading the books. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's a good writer for that. Like she did that really well.
Yeah.
But often these older ones as well. Like I know I read Mythopoeia. I know you probably didn't hear me reading Mythopoeia, and that was an example of Tolkien's work, Tolkien's poem. And so, you know, when we're talking about plot thrust moving forward, poems are great for this, because poems are like almost all tone. It's like tonal. And so you're just kind of like, a lot of things become subservient to the tone, you know, almost like it's a song. And so like, you know, some lines are not even going to make a lot of sense, but they're there because they serve the tone of the poem. They just kind of like give a vibe, you know. And obviously better poets like Tolkien are going to be able to do multiple things with
Yeah.
their meter and with the words, the chosen words they use. But and that was obviously a masterful poem. But I think that what comes through, like you don't have to like dig into each word, but what comes through is this general kind of idea of how important the light of God's creation is on man, and how we are created to also create. And so we shouldn't put the scepter of that beautiful mission down. We got to hold that scepter like as God's child, as God's subcreator, and that it's not untoward or bad of us to live according to our purpose in God. So that if you haven't read Mythopoeia, I don't know if you've read that. Have you read that? It's not too long. It's a few pages. I mean, depending on the size of your text, but it's not very long.
Cool.
It's not like an epic poem or whatever.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, speaking of epic poems,
Yeah.
I think people like Tolkien were greatly inspired by epic and classical literature. Obviously, the mythologies of the different cultures. And I wanted to read one of the things here about Tolkien. Right now I'm looking on Wikipedia about Mythopoeia, and you can just go there, anybody, to read more about Mythopoeia. But it says, like, just like as it says here, the term Mythopoeia comes from a Hellenistic Greek, Mythopoeia, meaning myth making. So it's about making myth intentionally, as I was saying, a creation of myth. First recorded in 1846. So it's a very long, it's got a lot of history to it. But there's lots of examples of it. William Blake, who is not a Christian, George MacDonald, as I said, H. Rider Haggard, Lord Dunsany. There's lots of other, and they're not all Christian, obviously. But I thought I would mention Tolkien a little bit here. It says, Tolkien scholars have likened his views on the creation of myth to the Christian concept of logos, or the word, which is said to act as both the language of nature spoken into being by God and a repetition of in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. So it's world building, right? It's its own kind of form of world building. When you understand what the logos is, which is kind of like the blueprint for nature that was spoken into being by God, that's kind of what writers essentially do when they write a book. And, you can say that, that's too grandiose. No, actually it's not. That's what you're doing. You're creating a world of magic and mystery and beauty and, uniqueness. And so the idea is that this is something God already gifted us to do. We need to use this gift for His glory and to mirror His greatness. So not to pretend ourselves greater than this, but actually to be subservient by following, right? We're following in His footsteps as our Father. He's our Father, so it's our job to follow Him. So they talk about in film. They often call it in film. They call it world building or a mythology. Sometimes there's a Bible or a canon. They'll call it to a certain franchise where they engage in world building. And there's lots of legends and things. It doesn't matter where in the world we're talking about. There's old legend, this like Arthurian legend, and there's many different versions of the Arthurian legend. There's nothing wrong with that. That's often how you're creating kind of like a multi-textured story. So, superheroes, the superhero universes are all following in this same kind of tradition. So this is not some kind of strange new idea whatsoever. But I think you have to be bold enough to intentionally engage in it. I think that's kind of one of the ideas here. But yeah, I mean, are there any other things you wanted to mention about George MacDonald or Mythopoeia that you can think of?
Just the power of an anything can happen universe. With God, all things are possible. A reality where, at any point, the main character could be, just thrust into something otherworldly, and then likewise the resolution could be, out of another time and place, and it's never what you expect, and but it's more than just exciting. It's more than just an adventure novel.
Right.
It's my favorite example of this is just the movies of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
There's so much
Absolutely
to that challenge of your, are you going to make that choice, being that you are a being made in God's image, are you going to make the choice that says that you're God's child, or are you going to make the choice that says, you're just in it for yourself?
Right.
And these are the challenges, or these are the kind of things you find a lot in fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to oversimplify it and say moral choices or listening to your conscience or something like that.
Right.
It's much deeper than that. It's a moment of real testing.
Mm-hmm.
We were just talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah.
It's a real moment of finding out what you're actually made of.
Yeah.
Or who you're made by. And
like the dual suns on Tatooine, right? No, I'm serious. That's Luke Skywalker's moment to decide: am I going to go on this quest, or am I going to stay home on the farm?
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. And when I go on the quest, am I going to like myself afterwards?
Right.
Thinking of The Hobbit again, Bilbo Baggins is really, really struggling, really uncomfortable on this adventure, but really surprising himself.
Yeah.
At the same time, surprised by how brave he is, and surprised at how clever, he has. He's become moments of cleverness, and then of course he's really, really tempted to use this new ability to be self-motivated.
Yeah.
It's
it's finding out who he really is, what's he's made of.
And I think there's something in that when you're finding out who you really are. There's something about discovering God in that. And I'm not making some kind of weird statement you're God. I'm not trying to say that, but it's you're realizing that there's stuff about you that you don't know.
Yeah, when you really reach the end of yourself, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
When you reach the end of yourself, what do you turn to? Do you turn to some kind of drug?
Yeah.
What do you do? Or do you turn to God and ask God for help? So it's like
Yeah.
it's that person, the atheist, who's like they're stuck on that flight and the flight is going down and they start praying to God right then.
Yeah.
Like, why are they doing that? Well, because there's something inside of them that's telling them that there's something more to the world and to
Yeah.
the universe than they were willing to admit to themselves before. But they know it deep down, right?
Right.
They know deep down that there must be something. And even if there's not, it's worth the try. Like
Yeah.
before it wasn't worth the try, but now it's worth the try. You know,
Yeah.
when all else fails, right, what do? And so many of us, when we reach the end of our rope, we actually do need that safety net to believe that there's something bigger than ourselves in the world that recognizes that good and evil exists in the world and
Yeah.
wants good for us. That good spirit that wants something good for us.
Right.
That's the person you reach out to. That's the spirit you call out to. That's the belief that kind of like is down at the bottom foundation of your soul. And so
Yeah.
many of us just get there a little quicker, or we've had a hard time about it, and so we reach the end of our rope quicker, and then we discover God. And many of us, it hasn't been as bad, or we haven't seen the need to go there. But eventually, we go there. And if we haven't gone there yet, then we will at some point go there and realize that there's something there that can lift us up and hold us up.
Yeah.
And give us meaning and give us, like, instead of us being broken, right, there's that thing that can hold us together.
Yeah.
And then we can always come out of that and be healed or fixed or preserved and then say, oh, no, whatever, that wasn't really God. You know, later you can disavow what you knew was true before. But at that moment, you either decide it's true or not. You either decide that you need this belief or you don't. And I think that there's a lot of that belief for a lot of people that they don't realize it's there until they come to the end of their rope.
Yeah.
And so they're calling out for this thing. And there's some, back to the Mythopoeia idea, there's something in this discovery that isn't just about the bad times, right? How we talk about, like, when you're at the end of your rope. It's not just about the bad times. It's also about these kind of profound good moments where there's something beautiful, like, who was that friend, the book you read about how he became a Christian by looking at a tree?
Oh, yeah. He is my friend. Yeah. Brother Lawrence.
Brother Lawrence. And so the simplicity of that, which when you dig down is not simple at all, it's profoundly beautiful, is that when we have these beautiful moments, these kind of like sublime, sometimes serene moments, often it's in nature, where you see that there's something beautiful there that couldn't have just happened by chance. And it isn't even about chance so much as just the sheer beauty, right? That can overwhelm us and fill us with kind of this sense of the grandeur.
Yeah.
And so you're like, what is this thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I find that that's true in fairy tales, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about every fairy tale like Grimm's fairy tales, which can be very dark. I'm talking about the George MacDonald style of fairy tales, which are kind of profoundly glorious in a way. There's this kind of like beauty in that, in the dawn or dusk light, when things are different and strange, and you look out into nature and it looks otherworldly and alien in a way, and then you're kind of beckoned forth to participate in this like liminal space that is almost spiritual,
Yeah.
or foreign to you, and then you go on this journey, right? So these kinds of fairy tales are the classic fairy tales that you go on a journey. It could be the Princess and the Goblin. It could be the Giant's Heart. It could be the Golden Key. It could be, if you know George MacDonald, these are all George MacDonald stories. It could be the Shadows. It could be At the Back of the North Wind. All of these are like that, but they're all uniquely different stories as well. So they're not all the same stories. No, no. Like At the Back of the North Wind, it's a child who becomes friends with the wind, the north wind, who is a spirit who visits him, and she takes him on a journey out into the cold north wind, right? And talks to him about the universe, and has it's kind of a lesson in many ways for children to see the big world outside their room and see what it's about. But it's just like a massively beautiful fairy tale, fairy story as well. And that's just Back of the North Wind. I mean, Golden Key is also very similar to Day Boy Night Girl in the sense that there's a boy and a girl, and they're friends. They're very different people, and they learn from each other. Of course, feminists won't like these stories. Because there's a boy and a girl and they help each other. But, so that's why we need these stories, right? We want to frustrate the logic of these people who don't have any compassion for real people. So, instead we want to kind of preserve Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values, and this is love for each other, love for your fellow man. And so if we want to do that, we need to participate in telling these stories. And so Mythopoeia is just it's like a creation myth. It's like a legendarium. It's like a world building where you're engaging and creating this beautiful story that has meaning, and beauty to it.
Yeah.
It's got the same kind of beauty we're talking about with fairy tales. And so, go ahead.
It's and it's the kind of story where it shows you what you're made of, and
Mm-hmm.
if you're in a desperate situation, or even if you're just in a situation where you can help someone, it's like the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
It's like
right. Parables.
what is the choice that you're going to make, or just who are you in that moment?
Yeah.
And then if you make a choice where you wind up doing, what we would call like the right thing, or,
Mm-hmm.
if you wind up showing bravery or
Yeah.
whatever, then where does that bravery come from?
Yep.
Or like the ability to make that good choice. Where did that ability come from?
Mm-hmm.
Did it come from you yourself, or did it come from something, from someone?
Something divine.
Yeah, from someone divine who has deeply inspired you in ways that maybe you're not even conscious of.
Well, and also, not just where does that come from, but where are you going now? Like, where does it send you?
Yeah.
And then this beautiful journey that you get to describe now on where it sends you. And because falsely, many people believe that if you're a good person and you do good things, then good things are going to happen to you.
Yeah.
And then when that doesn't happen, then they get very disgruntled or unhappy or sad or angry at God. And they've been sold this kind of like false idea, like the American dream, that like everything's just going to work out for you and everything's going to be fine. After all, you've been a good person, and therefore, this is not a Christian story. That's not what actually Christianity teaches.
No.
Christianity
No.
doesn't teach that. So when we kind of like buy into this kind of more modern idea that you can have everything and everything's going to be fine. I mean, it's true that it's not only a modern idea. Essentially, the story of Job was the same problem, wasn't it? Job was believing that because he was a good person, everything should work out for him. But that's not what occurred, is it? So
Right.
then he had to kind of struggle with this idea, like what do I do now? And so there's a lot there we have to contend with, and that's what these stories are about. They're helping us to contend with these ideas.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good storytelling in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I heard of a girl who looked out her window and saw someone walking down the street, and they were hot and they were tired, and she ran and gave them a bottle of water from the fridge, and they said thank you, and there's the beginning of a fairy tale right there.
Yeah.
Like, there's a moment, where it sounds kind of corny to say like the crossroads or whatever, but there's a moment where you can kind of make a decision. Like, is this going to be just kind of an ordinary, maybe egocentric, living for myself sort of day?
Right.
Or is this going to be, a knight rescuing a maiden from a dragon kind of day?
Yeah, yeah.
And I keep thinking of, this moment from I'm so blessed. Our kids love the Narnia movies.
Yeah, they do. They're pretty great.
They just, all three of them do, and I think they can really relate to the kids. And they love Aslan, and we were just watching the last one with the boat in it. What's it called? The dragon.
Yeah.
The boat that's shaped like a dragon.
The Dawn Treader.
There, thank you.
Yeah.
Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And we were watching that one, and it's Aslan speaking to Edmund and Lucy, and he's saying that it won't be coming back to Narnia.
Yeah.
And it's sort of sad. It's sort of kind of shockingly sad. But it's the end of the trilogy in that context.
Right.
And he says, I'm known by another name in your world, and it's time for you to know me by that name.
Yeah.
And that's what I hear when I read fairy tales.
Yep.
I hear this, like, there he is. There's the Lord in this fairy tale by another name. And
exactly.
That just speaks really powerfully to me. There's just something in fairy tales that is so hen.
It's so innocent and just beautifying. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's just deeply beautiful. And like you said, it's sad, but it's also it's that bittersweet moment, right? Where the story must end, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? It changes, right? The story doesn't just end, it changes in you. It becomes something inside of you. And then you get to go on another story, but it's just different.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of like what we need to be doing more of. And I just wanted to inspire you all that, like the Pendragon cycle should be coming soon, but there's other stories that need to be happening and stuff that we need to be developing now if they're going to happen in the next 5 years. So these kinds of things have to be starting now. And, there's epic poems out there. There's all kinds of stories that you just need to read them and find beauty in them, and then work on adapting them and making them, bringing them into the real world. And so we're behind you. We want to help people. Contact us and work with us if there's something you want to do. And we want to see your work. But we appreciate you guys, and we're going to wrap it up. But Mythopoeia is a very important element to what we're doing, and we believe it should be an entire new film genre, frankly, just called Mythopoeia. And we love you guys and appreciate you. And where can people find you, Rebecca?
Oh, you can find me at Facebook at Rebecca Loves Jesus and YouTube at Rebecca Loves Jesus, and also Instagram at Jesus Loves Rebecca. But I'm here on X as When We Love Jesus.
Yes. And I'm, of course, here on X2 on Jon Croft, which is Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. And you can find me also at the Media Moses and online at MediaMoses.com. So appreciate you guys, and stand up for the culture.
Yeah.
We love you guys. Good night.